Hey everyone, it's Peter Kerr from Daydream Nation, and I've got back in the co-captaincy Peter Wicks from our monthly panel chat. How are you, mate?
Good, mate. And yourself?
No, not too bad at all. Not too bad.
Good to
Now,
be back.
today's episode, we're going to be doing great debut albums, and the whole purpose of the show is just some are
Absolutely.
well known, some not so well known. We've picked five, not rank it in any particular order. So, Mr. Wicks, take it away. What's your
All right.
first choice?
Well, I actually was silly and chose six. I don't know how I managed to do that.
That's all right.
But anyway, well, I won't do six.
Yeah.
But the first one I'll talk about is Rage Against the Machine. I know it's not one that people will have forgotten about. But Rage are actually back touring again until Zach did his hamstring or something or other, and he's gone off. But yeah, 1992, Rage Against the Machine self-titled album. It was a slow burner. It kicked off, and it sold. It had been out for almost a year and sold 75,000 copies. And I think the record companies at the time were wondering what was going on. They were eagerly anticipated and eagerly signed up and had offers from basically every major record label. And then they jumped on the Lollapalooza tour, and that was it. Bang, off they went. So within a short time after that, it was up to 3 million. So fantastic album. Some would call it a crossover album, obviously very heavily rap influenced, massive heavy riffs from, and the line that everybody knows, fuck you, I won't do what you tell me. I mean, God,
Yeah.
that became an anthem, and it still is. So best tracks in my mind, obviously, the track everybody knows, in Killing in the Name of.
Yes.
But every track on it is an absolute scorcher. Like, you can hear influences from obviously rap, Led Zeppelin. There's some heavy Zeppelin riffs. Tom Morello really cemented himself as one of the greatest guitarists on the face of the planet with that album. It sounded like there was a lot of synth and a lot of scratching and whatnot, but it was all done with guitar. There wasn't a single effect used on the album. Just an absolute classic. The cover in itself was a controversial cover. It showed a Buddhist monk, the act of self-immolation, where he basically torched himself in front of a crowd, and that was to protest a corrupt Vietnamese government that was trying to suppress Buddhism. And just everything about that album kicked, like the messaging, the politics of it, the heaviness. It was just instantly addictive. And funnily enough, we did the 1992 albums the other week, and one of my mates, a guy called Steve, who's a drummer, he was actually in a band called Death by Milk Float. Would you believe? I think he had his nose a bit out of joint that I didn't include it in the 1992 album, so I had to chuck it in this one. So there you go, Rage Against the Machine. If you haven't got it, get it. And yeah,
Very good. Well, even though this show, the premise is ones that have been forgotten, we're throwing in, just whatever. And that is a great album. I don't think it's dated one iota. It sounds current. It's relevant. Lyrically, it's just as now as it was in 1992. So that's a top pick. That's great.
well, actually, one of the best follow-up album to that one is actually The Prophets of Rage. I don't know if you've heard Prophets of Rage.
No.
It's basically Rage Against the Machine, but with Chuck D from Public Enemy and what's his name from Be Real from Cypress Hill.
Right. Yes.
As the singing, doing the vocals.
Yeah.
And that's a fantastic album. It sounds very much like the Rage's first album.
Look, it was definitely at the peak of crossover, because everything in 1992 was crossover: funk, rap, punk, metal, alternative, indie. It was all just put in a melting pot, and that's just a prime example. So
Everyone ended up in the mosh pit.
no, absolutely. No, that's a good one. All right. Well, this one is, I've raved about this album heaps of times. I'm going to do it again. I think this is a bona fide classic. Rose Tattoo, 1978, the self-titled debut. A lot of people just say AC/DC, but to me, I think this is one of the finest debut albums Australia's ever produced. Out of the Albert stable of Vander and Young, you've got Angry Anderson, Pete Wells, Mick Cox, and I think it's just raw, it's grungy, it's primal, and it's almost punk. And when you hear those first slide guitar chords or progressions of Rock and Roll Outlaw, you know it's making a statement.
Absolutely.
The lyrics, it's just pure street poetry. It's about relationship. It's, stories from the streets in regards to drugs, pushes, hookers, anything that was happening in 1978. And I just think it's a stone cold classic. The standout tracks for me, as I said, first track is Rock and Roll Outlaw, Bad Boy for Love, Astra Wally, also One of the Boys, Remedy. Look, it's all killer. There's no filler. And I really think that a lot of people, rightly they talk about the work that Vander and Young did with AC/DC and those Bon albums, but you've got to not ignore Rose Tattoo.
That's right.
And I think, Pete, we kind of take them a little bit for granted in Australia because they've been around for ages. They play a lot of bills. They support a lot of bands, but, they are so influential. You wouldn't have had that Guns N' Roses, that sort of genre of music that came out in the late 80s that was heavily influenced by this album. I know a lot of those Guns N' Roses type bands, even Pearl Jam in the grunge scene were influenced by that album.
I think it was Slash that used to bring them up all the time.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But we kind of take them for granted. But I think, as an Australian institution, but, that album is stone cold royalty and it's just so gritty and raw. And I'd put it up like it's like a Stones meets an AC/DC album. The riffage is fantastic. And, that's my pick as a great debut.
The Australian punk pub rock had quite a distinct sound, and yet Pete Wells sounded completely unique with his style of guitaring with the old steel fingers and whatnot.
And the slide, dirty slide.
He had it to himself. No one else really went there with that cut it. But
yeah. Well, there's pub rock and there's pub rock, but I think that transcends pub rock, and that's in the world stage. And they could have been a contender, but if you look at it, some of the very strong imagery, they're out there. They're not pretty boys.
Looks like Selena's in the 80s.
Something like that. But anyway, that's my first one. I'll defend it to the death. I love that. Rose Tattoo.
All right. Well, my second one would be, and I'll see if I can find a picture, Urban Dance Squad.
Right.
Mental Floss for the Globe. I don't know if you've heard of that one. It's they were a Dutch crossover band. So this album came out in 1989, although it came out January the 1st. So it's fair to assume that they didn't do it all in one day. So it's more of a 1988 record. To listen to it, a lot of people say Rage Against the Machine. There was rumours that Rage Against the Machine actually formed after seeing Urban Dance Squad live in LA, but Tom Morello's seen them, but he's denied that. But you can definitely hear how, like, they were 3 or 4 years ahead of Rage, and you can hear how Rage has built on what they were doing. They were an unusual band, very funk-driven bass players. It was actually a band that was made up of several different bands from Holland, and they got together for a jam session, and they just had a jam session and thought, you know what, this clicks, and they came with this album, and it's an absolute cracker. The song most people would remember off, or may remember off it, was Deeper Shade of Soul. It got into the top 20 Billboard in the US. That's very much a mellow track for it. Others might remember Living in the Fast Lane, which actually was used in the movie Pump Up the Volume, an old Christian Slater movie. You don't even remember it.
I know that one, yeah.
But it was heavily used in that but yet never made the soundtrack for some strange reason. But anyway, they only did 3 studio albums, but I would advise checking them out. They are fantastic. If you the singer's, he comes from ska. His background is ska, but you can hear a lot of ska, you can hear a lot of punk, you can hear a lot of metal, hell of a lot of funk, and some reggae in there as well. It's just a real mishmash, but it's done really well, and they never really got the credit they deserved. So, yeah, 6 albums they've done, but 3 studio albums. So 2 live albums and a singles album. So, but Mental Cloth for the Globe, their first one, it's a ripper.
Yeah, I will check that one out. I'm not familiar with them, so yeah, definitely will do. Okay, so we go to 2002. So in the early 2000s, there was a bit of a revival with rock was back. You had the garage rock. You had bands like The Strokes, The Hives, White Stripes. And the band that I really got into on their first album that were waving the flag of garage rock was The Vines with Highly Evolved. Yes. So Craig Nichols, I think, was an absolute killer. And people forget how phenomenally popular that album was, top 5 in Australia. It got to number 3 in the UK. US, it went to 11. Gold, platinum. The big songs were Highly Evolved, Out of the Way, Get Free. It was played everywhere on, indie radio. Part influenced by Nirvana, part influenced by Beatles, garage rock, pop, psychedelia. It had it all, had a lot of energy. Craig Nichols was the band. I actually got on the Vines wagon for quite some time, and then you sort of saw that they were making the same album again and again and again. So I kind of jumped up after the 6th or 7th album.
I didn't even know they made that many too.
Yeah, they kept on going. The next album, Winning Days, didn't go so well, but in regards to raw primal energy, and I saw them live off the back of this album at the Metro, and it was quite a memorable performance. And they were red hot worldwide and really raising the flag of rock, and it really just well constructed rock songs. 3 minutes, simple, direct, but just sort of paying homage to all that sort of era. Yeah,
90 seconds. The title track. It doesn't sound like 90 seconds. It's like it goes at a blistering pace. It's just a absolute cracker. I remember watching him get interviewed, Craig Nichols, and the interviewer said, "Do you realise the title track's only 90 seconds long?" And even he didn't know. It's just like, wow, it just doesn't seem like a minute and a half, but it's just absolute corker of an album, that is.
Yeah.
And they met at Newtown Macca's. They all worked at Newtown Macca's.
Yes, they did. Yes, they did. But
what sort of burger would you call that?
Yeah, but that is an example where, lightning in a bottle for the first album, and then the second and third, not so. Success didn't follow them. I still think they're touring. They've gone through various lineups. The original lineup did get back together about 5-6 years ago and did a package tour with Jet around the world. I think Jet and the Vines were sort of compared. But for me, I always thought that this band was much superior to Jet, and I really liked this album, and it just had such a balls energy. So I think that's a great debut. People just forget about.
I do like Jet, but I do think that album's better than anything Jet's done. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, excellent choice. Maybe they should have been called the McVines. Given they all came from Macca's. And it's funny, like, for a band that just sort of came out of nowhere, and you and I were both into the scene, like, I never knew them before they got famous. Newtown, which is like right on our doorstep.
Absolutely.
They just came out of nowhere.
Yeah. Well, anyway, what's your next one? What do you got?
All right, I'm going to go off in a completely different direction now. A band called Portishead. I don't know if you know Portishead.
Yes, I do.
So their debut album, Dummy, which is, I don't know where it would be on my top albums of all time, but it would probably be in the top 10, I'd imagine. It's if you never got into trip hop, it's something you feel like. It's a mood. You've got to be in the mood for it. You can't just stick it on and go, oh yeah, I'll sing along to that or pop along to it. You've got to be in the mood. You kind of absorb it. Anyway, it came out in 1994. Bear in mind, they're an English band from Bristol, and this came out at the height of Oasis and Blur and their fame. So Portishead were way out of left field. So they, like Massive Attack, were around, but weren't really the big name then. Another one at the time was Tricky. I don't know if you know Tricky.
Yes, I do.
Massive Attack and Portishead were the two biggies. But this album is by far their best, I think. Best songs on it are Roads, which if it's just absolute gold. It's very the backing music to Roads is like I think it's called a Deggio in G or something or other. It's a classical piece. Most people would remember it from Platoon, from the movie Platoon, but not the Portishead, but the classical song.
Yes.
It's just very, very haunting. And the band, interesting story about when they formed, they worked on their songs, and their early songs they put together, believe it or not, in Nina Cherry's kitchen. So at the time, Beth and Jeff, who were the founding members of the band, only a three-piece, were working on Homebrew with Nina Cherry, which was the follow-up to Raw Like Sushi, which is another one that could have easily gone on the list.
Yes.
But yeah, so that's where that all started for them. They only did 3 studio albums. There's a live thing which they did with the New York Philharmonic Orchestra, which is also absolutely soul-crushing. It's just fantastic. And in 2016, they did a cover version of SOS, the ABBA song. And it is like, it sends shivers up your spine. It's they did it in memoriam for Joe Cox. I don't know if you know Joe Cox. He was a British politician that got stabbed.
Yes, I'm familiar. That was a tragic, terrible story. I remember that really well.
He got murdered just near a pub I used to work at, funnily enough.
Yeah.
But she got murdered, and she was a huge refugee advocate, and they did a version of that song.
Yeah, I haven't heard the song, but does it really turn it on its head? And it's through the Portishead blender, really aggressive and dark.
You would think it's an ABBA song. It's just, it just sounds like a Portishead song. Sounds like it could have come straight off Dummy. So
right,
yeah. Roads is the best song. Glory Box, Wandering Star. But if you want something different, want something to mellow out to, check it out. Dummy, Portishead, fantastic.
Well, I have that album, and I was very much into trip hop in the day, and always go back to it. To me, Massive Attack is the godfather of that era, and that the first Massive Attack album is just it's a masterpiece. Portishead I like, but it's very dark and oppressive. The grooves are very deep. How would I explain it to it's sort of like it's akin to Sly and the Family Stone. There's a riot going on because the grooves are really dark and grungy, and it looks like it was recorded in a basement with a little bit more technology. But I love it a lot, but it's not a very happy album.
No, it's not.
You don't want to just sort of serenade your missus or your other half.
No.
But it's definitely it's a trip, and it's very oppressive.
Albums are pretty miserable, actually. I don't know.
Sorry.
Most of my favourite albums are pretty miserable.
Yeah,
you know what that says about me.
Well, trip hop was very much of that, but there was a whole genre where you had these really dark, oppressive beats, very synthy, maybe a little bit of guitar thrown in, and that was prevalent in the 90s. And there was a whole lot of bands that came out of it. Mono was another one, Tricky, as you said.
Ruby was another fantastic artist.
Yeah,
That came out at the time.
and then there was a whole genre that turned it into even more poppy trip hop bands like Zero 07 and a few others like that. But yeah, look, that is a very landmark album of trip hop, and it's a great one. So yeah, good choice. Good choice. Familiar with that. All right. Change of pace. As I said, we've got all genres in this show. So, you know, if you don't like the last choice, there's something else that you probably will like. The next one I've got here is a band that were formed in 1977. Punk was the name of the game, and they are called the Dickies. And this is called the Incredible Shrinking Dickies. So if you like your music ironic, and if Fast and Furious, this is the band for you. So they are probably well known in the UK. They had a top 10 song with the Banana Split song, the La La La. They sold a shitload of singles, usually doing covers. So they do these really Fast and Furious versions of Paranoid, Eva Destruction, the Moody Blues song, Nights in White Satin. But this album is absolutely killer. It's catchy melodies. It's got great harmonies, and they just play fast and furious. And so, you know, on the East Coast, you'd have the Ramones, and I'd say the equivalent on the other side, but even more tongue-in-cheek humor were the Dickies on the West Coast. And, you know, they are so influential. There would be no Blink-182. There would be no Offspring. There's no Green Day. They are the direct lineage to all of those poppy punk bands. But they could play. Stan Lee, great guitarist. You know, all from top to bottom, all of the musos, they knew how to play. But definitely the lyrics were very ironic and tongue-in-cheek and fast and furious. But on this album, the standout tracks for me is probably the covers. I love Eva Destruction and Paranoid. Pete, have you ever heard the Dickies?
Never.
Yeah. Never. I think this is right in your wheelhouse, mate.
I will definitely check it out. It sounds to me a lot like, I don't know if you know the band, there's an Australian band, Mr. Floppy.
Yeah, yes, I have actually.
when you say about Fast and Furious covers, it makes me think their version of Wuthering Heights.
Yes, you're in the wheelhouse, son.
Yeah,
you're in the wheelhouse.
Mr. Floppy have one of the my favourite album titles of all time, which is the Strange Likeness of Being a Dickhead.
Yeah. No. Anyway, the Dickies, Incredible Shrinking Dickies.
I'll definitely check that out.
Check that out.
100%. Well, along a similar vein, actually, 1988, Tracy Chapman.
Right.
Maybe not quite the same, but anyway.
Okay.
Tracy Chapman's first solo effort. I think she's quite distinct. I still don't think there's anybody else that sounds like her. So the first album, if you don't know it, I'm sure you'd know several of the songs. You'd know Fast Car, not that crappy version that was re-released. I don't know, some techno band did a rehash of it a couple of years ago that made me want to vomit. But anyway, the original one, Fast Car, Talking About a Revolution. What else is it? Baby Can I Hold You, before Ronan Keating covered it. But absolute classic album. So if you want something that's soul, that makes you think, like you hear a voice and you can almost hear the heartbreak in a voice. It's quite an incredible album. She was discovered at an anti-apartheid rally, funnily enough. Right. So there was an anti-apartheid rally thing happening, and she was known as a protest singer, and she was playing in a cafe. And the guy that basically managed her, went to the cafe and saw her and thought she was incredible. And and then they struggled to get her signed, because at the time it was all hair metal. It was like, you know, the height of Motley Crue and Rat and all of that. And Tracy Chapman was obviously quite far removed from that.
Yep.
And she's Rolling Stone creditor as what did they say? But anyway, she was basically credited as totally reviving the singer-songwriter category. So anyway, fantastic album. If you want something that's emotional, political, it's all about poverty basically. It's quite a heartbreaking album.
I like the tone of her voice, always have. I don't have any in my collection, but I've always, obviously I've heard the radio hits, but one thing that I've always sort of liked about her singing is the tone. It's just a nice, and I agree, you can hear the heartbreak in her tone. It's very unique and distinct. And she definitely kicked off in the late 80s, the singer-songwriter. Hello, Melissa Etheridge. Hello, some others that haven't mind.
Alanis Morissette, all that type of
absolutely. Yeah. All righty. Goody. Next one is a bit of a change of pace. So we're going to the 80s, we're going to heavy metal. And one of my favorite guitarists was Jake E. Lee, who was playing in Ozzy Osbourne's band in the Bark at the Moon and the Ultimate Sin. Now, he left the band, got sacked by Sharon. Hello, Sharon Osbourne. He formed a band with a singer called Ray Gillen, a drummer called Eric Singer, and a bass player called Greg Chazon. And the album is Badlands, self-titled debut. This is a killer album, and I don't know if you've heard it, Pete, but it is not like hair metal. It is an album that sort of is a hark back to the classic rock of the 70s. It's very Led Zeppelin sounding. It's got a lot of riffage. It's very organic. You haven't got the gated drums that a lot of those late 80s hair metal hard rock bands were doing. Every song is killer, and but it flopped. It didn't do so well because it probably went against the tide of the Bon Jovis with the synthesizers and the big power ballads. Its foot was firmly planted in the camp of traditional hard rock and that music of the 70s, and that's why it didn't do so well. Two more albums. Ray Gillen passed on. He died of an AIDS-related sort of illness. And there's been some contractual disputes in this album. It's been re-released once or twice, but it's in permanent shutdown with Atlantic Records. Just look it up on Google. That'll give you a bit of a story. I won't go into it. But as a classic rock album. What's that, sorry?
You can't get it on iTunes?
No.
Wow.
No. And there's a bit of a story to it. So you can just look it up on Google. But the album itself is just killer. Great songs, High Wire, Dreams in the Dark, Jane's song, Winter's Call. That's just to name a few. But if you like that sort of classic, big ballsy rock, and it's still got you got the Jake E. Lee Finesse guitar, but he puts it more as his solo service the song. That's the problem with a lot of metal in the 80s where it's the other way around, where the song serviced the guitarist. Yeah. But he was playing, in that sort of Zeppelin, that 70s hard rock, and it's just classic, and it should have done much bigger. And maybe it was the album not right for the times. If it was done in the 90s, around the early 90s, and you put it up around the Black Crowes and when there was a bit of a classic rock revival, it may have done a lot better.
Well, it's still going on now, the revival. You look at bands like Royal Blood, for example, very, and they could have easily, they're on my list of the top debut albums as well, Royal Blood, but they've got a very 70s feel to it, 70s rock feel. And
Anyway, there you go.
Check that out.
Absolutely.
All right. My next one's from 1994, and it's one that everybody will probably know. But anyway, it's Korn's first album, self-titled Korn album. So it was. They say it started the whole new metal phase, which is still going on. But to me, when I first heard it, I hadn't heard anything like it before. It was sort of like they got a mishmash of the starts of some of their songs were just like this mishmash, and it was like each instrument was playing something completely different to the other, and then it just all sort of moulded in and then kicked. And it was, I'd never heard anything like it before. It was quite impressive. And as lyrically, I mean, it's for a band to bring out their first album and for it to be about bullying or being bullied from the victim's perspective, child abuse, like, you know, how many songs about child abuse on the album? It's just unbelievable, and very personal songs as well. So subject matter and everything is very, very, very brave, I thought, for a record company to even put out an album while on those subject matters. As sound was completely unique at the time. Sepultura is probably the closest, but they were more easily accessible than Sepultura. The other big thing that came out of that album was the re-emergence of the bagpipes. We hadn't seen that since Bon Scott paraded through Melbourne doing It's a Long Way to the Top. So Jonathan Davis brought out the bagpipes again and for Chutes and Ladders, and yeah, and I think he's put the bagpipes in every album since, I think. I'm not 100% sure, but certainly most of his albums. The other thing about it was it also had a lot of rap influence as well. And the second album, they did an Ice Cube cover. The third album, of course, Ice Cube has appeared on it. So there was obviously a very, yeah, and you hear that in the bass lines in the album. Like the bass playing from Fieldy is just, yeah, brilliant. Like a lot of music at the time, the bass was just sort of like an extra beat, just kept up and didn't really change much. But he brought a real funk element into it. Just a fantastic album. Best songs for me were Clown, Chutes and Ladders, Fake, Helmet in the Bush. The other thing that strikes me about it is for such dark subject matter, it also has a sense of humour about it, which I find quite funny. You know, most
black humour, really dark humour,
very dark black humour, but it's still there, and it's pretty real. Rolling Stone, I've written this quote down. Rolling Stone called it the most important metal record of the last 20 years. There you go.
That's good.
Which is a big call.
Yeah.
So yeah. Anyway, that's
I don't have any Korn in my collection, so maybe that's one band
really?
I need to. Yeah, just one of those bands that just passed me by. So I will have to check that out. You've sort of sold me on that. So we'll see how we go.
Definitely worth checking out.
Absolutely. Good stuff. All right, my last one is a band that came out in the early 1990s. So there was a bit of a scene coming out of Manchester called the Manchester scene, and it was sort of music that was very heavily influenced by psych, beat, bit of dance culture. A lot of it was sort of one step away from the factory movement of New Order and bands like that. So you had bands like the Inspiral Carpets, James, Primal Scream, Happy Monday, Stone Roses, and the Charlatans, Some Friendly. Yep. So I bought this in the day when it came out in 1990, and I just loved it. It's think about the psych period of the Beatles or the Stones, maybe the first two Pink Floyd albums, even early Deep Purple, pre-Ian Gillan, when it was very psych orientated. Think of the song Hush, where it's very Hammond organ, John Lord, etc., etc. Yeah. I love this band. I love this album, led by Tim Burgess, John Baker on guitar, and I think one of the most valuable players is the Hammond organ, which just drives it, of Rob Collins. It's music that's sort of like you can dance to it. It's got a deep groove, and it was for Manol. You know, it was a phenomenally popular album in the UK. Went to number one, and the big songs were Only One I Know, Then, and You're Not Very Well was another song off the album. But it's just every song you've got the Hammond organ, you've got that little bit of on the bottom end, that groove, funky bass with the drums, and Tim Burgess's very whimsical singing. A lot of people don't like it because it they sort of think it gets tend to bury a little bit buried in the mix, but I think it mixes really well in the songs. And maybe it's a little bit of a 60s throwback with a modern touch, but I like this album a lot. Do you remember this one, Pete, in the day?
Not really. No, I was actually in the UK in the 90s, and that album was still very much talked about. It was, it was obviously a much bigger hit in the UK where they were from. But I'll have to check it. I don't have it, so I'll have to. I'll have to check that one out as well.
Yeah, I've seen them a few times. They've come out here, and they play really well, and they've got a good sound, and it kind of rocks. But again, it's got like the Stone Roses. There's a groove, an underlying groove where you can just not only listen, but you tap your foot, and you can have a bit of a dance and a shimmy to it. That Manchester scene was really huge in the early 90s, and in Sydney in the club culture, there were all these Manchester nights where they would just be playing songs from bands like the Happy Mondays, Inspiral Carpets, and James, that was it. I
didn't really get into that. The Happy Mondays I did, and I feel like the Happy Mondays, even Black Grape when Black Grape came out was fantastic. Yeah, that was some good stuff, but I never really got fully into that scene. But I'll have to check the Sharptons out.
They were following on the. I think that was a big album. This one that I've just showed you, Some Friendly, but the granddaddy was probably the Stone Roses, which was huge, and that really kick-started that whole scene. Yeah. Well, there you go. Well, there we go. We've got 5 albums. We should do this again because
cool. Like a lot of ones that I could have, should have, maybe, I don't know, thrown in the mix. A lot of bands started out with debuts with EPs, which aren't albums. So Divinals, for example, their first one was the Monkey Grip soundtrack.
Yes.
Had Desperate been their first one, that would have been in there for sure. That is an absolute classic.
It is, yes.
Tool, their first one was an EP. Spoon. A lot of bands started off with an
EP. Yeah. Look, there's totally there's a lot of honourable mentions. I was going to put Jeff Buckley in there, but I thought it was just too well known for the show. There's a lot of other shows out there that they just put them in the greatest debut albums. And then you've got the usual suspects. You've got Led Zeppelin 1. You've got Black Sabbath 1. It's not called Black Sabbath 1, but
you
Black
just take
Sabbath.
it for granted that they're in there.
Absolutely. But we'll do this again because I think that there's some other ones that people just may not think as the great debut albums. Well, there you have it. Today's show is
I've even got a list of those who want to pause. There's my list of almost made it. and I actually had 6. So Rammstein's first album got substituted for Tracy Chapman. Bit of a slight difference in styles there, but
I was almost going to put McCartney 1 too, which is a great album.
Again, do you class that as a debut or? It's like Wings or Lennon or,
debut as a solo artist, I guess. But we'll do it again. I reckon. I know you've got a list there. We will do it again. And
I could have made it as long as my map list. It's,
Absolutely. All right. So please like and subscribe to Rock Daydream Nation. We have got a show coming up next weekend, or it'll be dropped within 2 weeks, which is Pick a Song from 2002, where we've got the panel will be back with some new faces, just picking their favourite song of 2002, and we'll put it into a Spotify list and everyone can listen to it. So some of the people are throwing some suggestions out to me, and it's going to be a very wide and varied show in regards to the song choices. So I'm really looking forward to that.
I'm looking forward to that one. That'll be a good one.
Yeah. All righty. No worries.
The list too, on Spotify. That'll be awesome.
Absolutely. Okay. Catch you soon. See ya.